Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Overdrive Insider, where today we take a deep dive into one of the most important motorcycles ever built, the Harley-Davidson Knucklehead. This machine, introduced in 1936, was more than just a new model in a tough economic climate. It was a turning point that redefined what Harley-Davidson could be and reshaped the course of American motorcycling. At first glance, it might seem like just another old V-twin, but hidden within its cast-iron heart was an engineering gamble so bold that it either had to succeed or risk sending the company into obscurity. The Knucklehead didn't just survive, it became the spark that ignited a legend. Imagine the setting. The Great Depression had battered industries, families, and communities across America. Motorcycle sales had plummeted, competitors were folding, and Harley-Davidson, though surviving, was losing momentum. The company knew that if it kept relying on its tried-and-true flathead engines, it would be left behind by changing times and rival innovations. They needed something new, something powerful, and something that could capture not just riders' wallets, but also their imaginations. That answer came in the form of the Knucklehead. With its unique overhead valve design, the Knucklehead offered more horsepower and smoother performance than anything Harley had built before. Riders suddenly had access to power and reliability that made cross-country travel a reality, not just a dream. This wasn't just about moving faster down a straight road, it was about unlocking new freedom, a promise of the open highway that resonated deeply with the American spirit. Every turn of that V-twin told a story of reinvention, and every rumble carried the weight of Harley-Davidson's survival. But the Knucklehead's impact wasn't only mechanical, it was cultural. Its distinctive look, with rocker boxes that earned the engine its nickname, became instantly recognizable. It was a motorcycle that carried a personality, and in time, it would become the backbone of biker identity in post-war America. This opening chapter of the Knucklehead story is more than history. It's the setup for how Harley-Davidson redefined itself and created an entirely new mythology around motorcycling. Over the course of today's video, we'll explore how the Knucklehead was born from necessity and daring innovation, how its design and performance reshaped both the brand and its riders, and how its legacy continues to echo nearly a century later. From its engineering breakthroughs to its cultural impact, we'll follow the journey of the machine that didn't just keep Harley alive, it transformed it into a symbol of American freedom. So settle in, because this ride is going to show you how a single motorcycle engine turned uncertainty into legend, and why the Knucklehead remains one of the most iconic chapters in motorcycling history. The Knucklehead story begins not on the open road, but in Harley-Davidson's Milwaukee factory, where engineers in the early 1930s were working under immense pressure. The motorcycle market had collapsed, and the industry was shrinking. Inside the company, there was recognition that the flathead engines that had carried Harley for years were no longer enough. Rivals were testing new overhead valve technology, and there was a real risk that Harley could be left behind. This was the environment that gave birth to the 61 cubic inch overhead valve V-twin, the engine that would forever be known as the Knucklehead. It wasn't just about making a new product. It was about taking a high-stakes leap that could either save the company or end its run entirely. Microstory. Picture a young mechanic in 1936 who had been fixing flatheads for years. He was skeptical of Harley's new overhead valve design, worried that it might be fragile and prone to failure. When he first rode the Knucklehead, though, he was stunned by the surge of power and the way the bike seemed to glide compared to the heavy chug of the old engines. That mechanic wasn't alone. Many riders who had doubts quickly became believers after experiencing the new machine firsthand. Their word of mouth would help turn suspicion into enthusiasm, building early momentum that Harley desperately needed. Context digest. The Knucklehead earned its name not from Harley's marketing team, but from the community of riders and mechanics. The distinctive rocker boxes on top of the engine, with their unusual rounded shape, reminded people of clenched fists or knuckles. That nickname stuck and became part of the bike's identity, showing how riders themselves played a role in shaping the mythology around the machine. It wasn't just a model designation, it was a personality stamped in metal. Harley's decision to introduce the Knucklehead in the mid-1930s was especially bold given the economic climate. The country was still clawing its way out of the Depression, and few people had the money to buy a brand new motorcycle. This meant that the Knucklehead had to be more than good, it had to be extraordinary. Harley marketed it as a machine that could carry a rider across the continent, a claim that resonated with those dreaming of freedom at a time when daily life was still marked by scarcity. Micro story. A cross-country journey in the late 1930s might sound romantic, but it was a grueling test of man and machine. One rider who set out from Chicago to the West Coast found that his knucklehead carried him through endless miles of dirt roads, mountain passes, and desert stretches without the breakdowns that plagued earlier machines. That kind of performance built a reputation that advertisements alone could never match. The knucklehead became a symbol of trustworthiness when trust was in short supply, and that mattered more than horsepower ratings on a spec sheet. Reflection bridge. The success of these real-world tests made the knucklehead more than a piece of machinery. It became proof that Harley-Davidson could still innovate under pressure. Of course, innovation rarely comes without challenges. Early knuckleheads had teething problems, particularly with oil circulation and valve guides. Riders loved the performance, but sometimes found themselves dealing with leaks or mechanical quirks that required adjustments. Yet even these flaws played into Harley's culture, because riders who tinkered with their knuckleheads felt more connected to their machines. Fixing, adjusting, and maintaining the engine became part of the ownership experience, a ritual that deepened loyalty rather than weakening it. Context digest. The engineering leap from side valve to overhead valve was not just about speed. Overhead valves allowed more efficient airflow through the engine, which meant greater combustion and better performance. Harley's engineers had studied racing technology and applied those lessons to a road bike, bringing track innovation to everyday riders. This was a significant move because it blurred the line between competition machines and mass-market motorcycles, giving everyday buyers a taste of racing technology. Micro story. Consider a group of young riders in Southern California in the late 1930s. They pooled their money to buy a single knucklehead, and they took turns riding it along stretches of the Pacific Coast Highway. Each rider felt like they were piloting something almost futuristic, a machine that seemed a leap ahead of its time. For them, the knucklehead wasn't just transportation. It was a ticket into a new social circle, a marker of belonging to a group that valued speed, style, and adventure. That sense of community would ripple outward, helping establish the culture that grew around Harley-Davidson for decades to come. By the early 1940s, the knucklehead had proven its worth. Sales were strong relative to the tough market, and the motorcycle had given Harley-Davidson a new identity. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about leading with innovation. Reflection bridge. This leadership would soon be tested by forces far bigger than the motorcycle market itself. Context digest. When World War II broke out, Harley-Davidson shifted production toward military bikes like the WLA, but the knucklehead's influence didn't vanish. Engineers carried lessons from its overhead valve design into wartime development, and soldiers who rode Harleys overseas came home with a taste for powerful American motorcycles. The knucklehead became a bridge between the pre-war and post-war eras, ensuring Harley had a foundation to build on when peace returned. Micro story. A returning veteran in 1946 might have saved part of his GI Bill money to buy a motorcycle. For many, the knucklehead was the dream machine waiting in showrooms. That purchase wasn't just about getting around, it was about reclaiming a sense of freedom after years of military service. These riders helped launch the post-war biker culture, and at the center of it all was the knucklehead, a motorcycle that embodied strength, independence, and resilience. The post-war boom was the moment when the knucklehead's reputation solidified. It was no longer just a technical achievement. It was the foundation of Harley-Davidson's mythos. But as America's highways expanded and culture shifted, the knucklehead's role would evolve once again, carrying the brand into new cultural battles and opportunities that went far beyond engineering. As the 1940s turned into the 1950s, the knucklehead's legacy began to take on a life of its own. By then, Harley-Davidson had introduced its successor, the Panhead, but the knucklehead remained the touchstone that defined a generation of riders. Veterans had brought home an appetite for powerful motorcycles, and the knucklehead became the machine that embodied their search for freedom. This was the era when the American highway system was expanding, creating new possibilities for cross-country travel. The knucklehead stood at the crossroads of technology, culture, and identity, and the way riders used it transformed both Harley-Davidson and American motorcycling itself. Micro story. Imagine a group of friends in the late 1940s setting out on Route 66 with a knucklehead at the center of their adventure. Their journey wasn't about getting somewhere fast. It was about testing the open road, sleeping under the stars, and proving to themselves that freedom could be felt in the roar of an engine. That story was repeated thousands of times across America, and each trip added another chapter to the knucklehead's growing mythology. Context digest. The cultural backdrop was shifting as well. The post-war period saw the rise of motorcycle clubs, some loosely organized for camaraderie, others more tightly bonded in brotherhood. While not all of these groups were rebellious or anti-establishment, the knucklehead's presence in their ranks cemented its image as a symbol of independence. Photographs from the time often show rows of knuckleheads lined up outside diners and meeting halls, machines that carried both prestige and raw personality. Yet there was also conflict. The knucklehead became a canvas onto which American society projected its fears and fascinations. Movies in the 1950s began to portray motorcyclists as outlaws, fueled by the sound of a Harley engine. While this stereotype was an exaggeration, it tapped into something real: the knucklehead's association with riders who didn't want to be boxed in by conventional life. This tension between admiration and suspicion only made the motorcycle more magnetic. Reflection bridge. The knucklehead was no longer just about performance. It had become an emblem of American identity, both celebrated and challenged. Micro-story. A young rider in the 1950s might have inherited his older brother's knucklehead, a machine already carrying years of stories. He would spend weekends wrenching on it, polishing chrome, and then taking it out to local meets where the roar of his V-twin announced his arrival. For him, the motorcycle wasn't just a hand-me-down. It was a rite of passage, a link to the larger brotherhood of riders who shared the same passion. That sense of continuity is one reason the knucklehead has remained such a beloved piece of Harley history. Context digest. From an engineering standpoint, the knucklehead's importance lies in the doors it opened. By proving that overhead valve V-twins could be both powerful and reliable, it established the foundation for Harley's future big twins. The panhead, shovelhead, and later evolution engines all carried the DNA of the knucklehead. Every step of Harley's engine evolution owed something to the bold leap made in 1936. This continuity is part of why collectors treat knuckleheads as holy relics. They represent the beginning of a lineage that still defines Harley-Davidson today. Micro-story. On the West Coast in the 1960s, custom builders began chopping and modifying knuckleheads, stripping them down to bare essentials and creating machines that reflected personal identity. These choppers weren't just mechanical experiments. They were rolling statements of rebellion and artistry. At the center of those builds was the knucklehead engine, its silhouette instantly recognizable even when the rest of the bike had been radically altered. These custom creations spread the legend of the knucklehead to new audiences, embedding it into counterculture and popular imagination. Reflection bridge. By the time Harley-Davidson entered the turbulent 1970s, the knucklehead was no longer in production, but its influence was everywhere, visible in the culture of riders, in the lineage of Harley's engines, and in the very idea of what an American motorcycle should represent. Context digest. The knucklehead's market value began to climb as early as the 1970s. Riders and collectors recognized that these machines were not just old bikes. They were icons. Restorers sought out original parts, and motorcycle shows featured gleaming knuckleheads as centerpieces. This preservation movement ensured that the knucklehead would not be forgotten, even as newer engines took the stage. Its enduring desirability helped cement its reputation as one of the most important motorcycles ever made. Micro-story. Consider a modern rider who discovers a knucklehead in a dusty barn. The moment of pulling back the tarp and seeing that knuckled rocker box is like uncovering buried treasure. Restoring that machine becomes not just a project, but a pilgrimage, a way to connect with history and carry it forward. When that rider finally kicks it over and hears the engine come to life, they're not just hearing a machine, they're hearing echoes of every rider who ever lived the knucklehead legend. This combination of cultural identity, engineering heritage, and personal passion kept the knucklehead alive long after production ended. Its legend grew larger with every decade, setting the stage for how Harley-Davidson would continue to define itself and how American motorcycling would always carry a piece of the 1936 breakthrough. The knucklehead's enduring influence became even more apparent in the decades that followed. as Harley-Davidson faced new challenges and transformations. By the late 20th century, the motorcycle market had shifted, with Japanese manufacturers offering high-performance machines at competitive prices. Harley's identity could easily have been overshadowed, yet the memory of the Knucklehead gave the brand a foundation of authenticity that no rival could duplicate. Collectors, riders, and enthusiasts pointed back to 1936 as the moment Harley proved itself, and that history became part of the company's defense against the tides of change. Micro-story. In the 1980s, a small-town Harley dealership displayed a meticulously restored Knucklehead in the center of its showroom. Customers came to see the newest Harleys, but their eyes were always drawn to the gleaming machine from half a century earlier. It was more than a motorcycle. It was a conversation starter, a reminder that Harley's modern bikes carried a legacy stretching back to that iconic overhead valve engine. The Knucklehead wasn't competing with new models. It was elevating them, showing customers that they were buying into a story bigger than any single year or design. Context Digest. The resurgence of Harley-Davidson in the 1980s and 1990s was fueled in part by its ability to sell heritage. While rivals focused on speed, technology, and affordability, Harley leaned on tradition, character, and the cultural weight of its history. The Knucklehead was the anchor point for this strategy, a symbol that validated Harley's claim to authenticity. Its mythic status became a marketing tool, and its silhouette was often invoked to remind buyers of the brand's roots. As the custom motorcycle scene grew in popularity, the Knucklehead gained new layers of prestige. Builders sought out original Knucklehead engines as the ultimate starting point for bespoke creations. Even stripped down and rebuilt, the distinctive rocker boxes signaled authenticity and prestige. The scarcity of surviving engines only heightened their desirability, creating a marketplace where owning a Knucklehead was akin to holding a piece of American motorcycling's crown jewels. Reflection Bridge. What had started as a gamble to save a company had become the artifact that defined its very soul. Micro-story. In the early 2000s, at a motorcycle rally in Sturgis, a crowd gathered around a rider who had rolled in on a perfectly running Knucklehead. Younger riders, many of whom had never seen one outside of photographs, listened as the owner explained its quirks and history. That moment wasn't just about admiration. It was about generational connection. The Knucklehead provided a tangible link between the pioneers of motorcycling and those just discovering the culture, showing that Harley's story is as much about continuity as it is about change. Context Digest. Engineering advances in modern Harleys, fuel injection, electronic ignition, liquid cooling, mark a world far removed from the 1936 Knucklehead. Yet Harley has carefully preserved the emotional essence of that original machine. The sound, the stance, the feel of a big twin that invites long-distance travel. This balance of innovation and tradition is central to Harley's survival, and the Knucklehead remains the benchmark by which authenticity is measured. Micro-story. A collector in recent years paid 6 figures for an original Knucklehead at auction, a staggering price for a motorcycle once bought during the Depression for a fraction of that amount. That sale wasn't just about rarity, it was about reverence. The buyer wasn't only acquiring a machine, he was becoming the steward of a legend. Each Knucklehead that survives today carries not only mechanical value but cultural weight, a symbol of the American story on 2 wheels. Reflection Bridge. Even as technology pushes motorcycling into new frontiers, the Knucklehead remains a compass pointing back to where it all began. The impact of the Knucklehead can also be seen in how Harley-Davidson riders view themselves. Owning a Harley is more than transportation. It's about belonging to a tradition, one that traces its roots directly to the bold decisions of 1936. The Knucklehead gave Harley a mythology, and that mythology became a competitive advantage, a cultural currency that has carried the company through ups and downs for nearly a century. Context Digest. In the modern era, the Knucklehead story has been retold countless times through books, documentaries, and restorations. Each retelling reinforces the same truth, that this motorcycle was not just a product of its time, but a defining artifact of American ingenuity. Its legacy isn't static. It continues to inspire new generations of riders, builders, and storytellers who find in it the essence of what motorcycling means. Micro-story. Picture a young rider today, scrolling through photos of Knuckleheads online, dreaming of one day seeing or even owning one. When that rider finally stands in front of a restored example at a motorcycle show, the machine feels less like a relic and more like a living presence. The Knucklehead carries an aura that transcends decades, and for that rider, it becomes the spark that ignites a lifelong passion for Harley-Davidson. The arc that began with a desperate gamble in the Great Depression ends with a motorcycle that became immortal. The Knucklehead didn't just create a legend for Harley-Davidson, it created the blueprint for American motorcycling itself, ensuring that every roar of a V-twin still carries echoes of 1936. The story of the Knucklehead is the story of a gamble that paid off beyond anyone's expectations. Harley-Davidson took a bold risk in 1936, unveiling an overhead valve V-twin that could have spelled disaster if it failed. Instead, it became the cornerstone of the company's survival, the spark of its mythology, and the foundation for its identity. Across the decades, the Knucklehead has transcended the status of a motorcycle to become a cultural symbol of freedom, rebellion, loyalty, and continuity. Looking back, what stands out is how the Knucklehead managed to bridge so many worlds. It was a technological leap, yet it was accessible enough to reach riders from all walks of life. It was a machine for individuals, yet it created communities. It was born in a time of struggle, yet it came to embody abundance, adventure, and confidence. Each stage of its journey carried forward the themes of resilience and reinvention, showing that Harley-Davidson's story is not one of straight lines, but of bold turns taken at just the right time. Even now, nearly a century after its debut, the Knucklehead remains more than a collector's prize. It's a touchstone that keeps Harley riders grounded in the authenticity of their brand. The Panhead, Shovelhead, Evolution, and Milwaukee 8 engines all owe their lineage to that original gamble. Every time a Harley thunders down a highway, it carries within it a piece of the Knucklehead's DNA. That's why enthusiasts still speak its name with reverence, and why its silhouette is instantly recognizable in any crowd of machines. For those who ride, restore, or simply admire the Knucklehead, the connection is deeply personal. It's about hearing the echo of history and the rumble of an engine. It's about remembering that freedom isn't just a destination, but a feeling created every time the throttle twists. The Knucklehead gave riders that feeling when they needed it most, and it continues to inspire generations who discover motorcycling through its legend. So as we close the chapter on this journey, remember that the Knucklehead is not just Harley's past. It's a permanent part of its present and future. It stands as proof that even in the hardest times, daring choices can create timeless icons. Thanks for riding with us on Overdrive Insider. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.